Welcome back to my ranking of all 32 Castlevania games released in the West after streaming each and every one over the course of a year and a half. In part 1, I talked about numbers 32 to 11, so make sure to check that out to see where each game placed. But now it's time to dive into the top 10. Which are the best of the best, and which is my favorite in the series? No matter what the rank, I truly recommend trying each of these games for yourselves. Many of them I would consider some of the best in gaming in general. But let's not waste any more time and see how I ranked my top 10 Castlevania games. Castlevania Curse of Darkness was such a pleasant surprise for me. While I enjoyed its predecessor, Lament of Innocence, I wasn't sure what to expect as that one was 3D, but often limited in its scope. Curse of Darkness seems to take every lesson learned from that game and make it better. Rather than focus on a central hub and areas that blend together, the game expands across the countryside to the woods, cities, causeways, and cathedrals. Combat is more varied, and there's a great sense of progression as you grow stronger. The plot is also surprisingly engaging, taking place 3 years after Castlevania 3 and focusing on Hector, a devil forge master who rebelled against Dracula. And that skill is key to Curse of Darkness, as it allows Hector to create and evolve special monsters known as innocent devils to aid him in combat, heal him, and even access new areas. The multiple evolutions ensure players are constantly trying new things, and the multitude of weapons at Hector's disposal ensure combat never got tired. It's also a lengthy game, though the pace never feels slow. With some great boss fights and surprisingly solid voice performances, Curse of Darkness easily became a favorite. It honestly makes me wonder why it's not talked about as much as the other games in the series. 3D Castlevania is often maligned, but there are fantastic games, as this certainly proves. As the last original Castlevania game to be released as of now, I was actually dreading my playthrough of Lords of Shadow 2. I had played it for a short time at release and was quickly bogged down by an early stealth section, so I just stopped playing. But upon my return and sticking with the game for more than an hour, I was shocked to discover just how much I enjoyed Lords of Shadow 2. Everything is improved over the original. The biggest problem is that first required use of stealth. The game is trying to emphasize the weakened state of Dracula, who you actually play as, but it just bogs down the pacing, especially after its bombastic opening. But as soon as you return to the castle, something clicks. Unlike the first Lords of Shadow, this is all one big interconnected world with plenty of secrets to find and return to. The game feels more focused than ever as it concentrates on its strong points: combat, light platforming, and its melodramatic story. On the surface, the combat might seem mostly the same, as Dracula can switch between two types of magic, one that heals him and one that increases his power. Except rather than using a whip the entire time, Dracula has access to a sword and gauntlets, which helps the variety. Players now earn experience from defeating enemies, which is spent to unlock more moves. Using these moves eventually leads to mastery, and after enough are mastered, the weapon becomes more powerful in general. It's a great system that encourages the use of different combos and really brings the whole thing together. The story is also surprisingly engaging, with a heartbreaking backstory for one character and a twist that I honestly didn't see coming. While backtracking can feel like a bit of a pain at times, Lords of Shadow 2 feels like a true hidden gem of the franchise. I could recommend it alone for its train sequence, which effortlessly blends together a boss fight, timed platforming, and stealth sections. It was by far my biggest surprise of the entire stream series, and I think it could surprise you as well. Castlevania Dawn of Sorrow began a run of games on the DS that are simply masterclass examples of the series. And while I believe this one to be the weakest of the three, it's still a fantastic game with some notable improvements over its predecessor, Aria of Sorrow, especially in regard to the soul system. The playable character, Soma, can still claim the souls of enemies in order to use their abilities like before, but now the system has been expanded as multiple souls power them up and can be spent to craft special weapons. The drop rates of these souls has also been somewhat improved, making it slightly less of a grind to get what you want. And if it were left to that, Dawn of Sorrow would undoubtedly be the better game. But there are other changes that hold it back. The biggest is the new magical seal system, which is a byproduct of it being an early DS game. That touch functionality had to be used in some way, so now players have to put in a seal to fully finish off a boss. Mess it up, and it gets a little health back, and the fight goes on. It's not too bad at first, but the more complicated seals can definitely lead to headaches, especially the first time through. Really, outside of having the map at all times, the second screen just intrudes on the solid gameplay. The art style is also a step back, but that's not too big of an issue as the sprite quality was greatly improved. Plus, it has one of the best extra modes in the series where players take the role of Julius Belmont, Yoko Belnades, and Alucard as they run through the game in a throwback to Castlevania 3. While this type of unlockable character playthrough has been done before, this is the best example both for its throwback and its completely original final boss. Despite my issues, Dawn of Sorrow shouldn't be missed. I skipped playing Castlevania Portrait of Ruin when it first came out, and for the life of me, I don't know why. I ended up missing out on some of the most varied locations in the series that also contained fascinating bits of lore that explained why many of the games didn't feature a Belmont in the starring role, while creating a connection to Bloodlines. Add in a partner system where the player could swap between Jonathan Morris's whip skills and Charlotte Allin's magic at any time, and I found myself having an absolute blast. I really do have to commend all the different places you visit in the game, despite it taking place in a castle once again. There are different paintings that can be entered, taking the player to wholly unique locations for the series, including an abandoned schoolhouse, a topsy-turvy circus, and a desert pyramid. While many of the later paintings only change a few things about these places, it still breathes life into a formula that had been well tread. This might also be one of the best soundtracks in the series, and that is certainly saying something. The partner system is a lot of fun, but I did find myself using Jonathan more than Charlotte, just because he can take a hit. Still, when the two of them use a dual crush, it feels powerful. It also has one of the most creative and fun final battles in Castlevania. Honestly, there's not a lot to complain about. I could easily see the argument that this game is someone's favorite. Heck, any of the games yet to be shown could be debated as the best in the series. It's just that good. Sometimes the original just stands the test of time, and that is most certainly the case for the original Castlevania. The style is timeless, the platforming is tight despite its purposeful limitations, and it's challenging without ever becoming too frustrating. I had never played the game before starting this project, but I had seen it plenty of times. Castlevania had always looked fun, but I just didn't take that leap to play it myself. I always thought I'd just stick with the newer games. And you totally can, although I feel you'd be missing out on a key part of not only Castlevania, but gaming history. Every moment of the game is iconic. The levels, the enemies, the bosses, all pulling from classic horror tropes that become this gothic funhouse. And it is a funhouse as the music never really gets moody or disheartening. This is a heart-pumping action beat and every element works. The whip shows progression, the sub-weapons change up how you take on different challenges, and the bosses are you taking on an iconic movie monster. It's truly masterful, and I'm amazed at how replayable it really is. It may be too old school for some, but I love it. There are a lot of remakes and reimaginings of Castlevania out there, many released not that long afterwards, but there's one that stands above in just how much it gets right, and that's Super Castlevania 4. It's essentially a brand new game with how little it pulls from the original. There are levels focusing on Simon just reaching the castle, and the castle itself pulls out plenty of new tricks and enemies that keep players on their toes. Simon himself controls beautifully and is still one of the most dynamic Belmonts in the series, as he can whip in all directions, be controlled in midair, and swing from specific points. It's so much fun to control that I often forget to use the returning sub-weapons. Many out there consider this to be one of the easier Castlevania games, and while I can see that argument, I don't necessarily agree. Certain sections are made much more manageable simply thanks to Simon's moveset, but others can be a downright nightmare. I still dread every time I have to climb the castle before the fight with Slagra, as one small mistake means redoing everything. And speaking of Slagra, there are bosses that can be a real handful, so this isn't exactly the most beginner-friendly Castlevania, in my opinion. But it's also one that shouldn't be missed, with fantastic music that blends more moody pieces with upbeat remixes and fantastic visuals, despite coming out soon after the launch of the Super Nintendo. It's a must-play for anyone even remotely interested in Castlevania. There are certain games that come along and completely upend what people think a game should be. Super Mario 64 did it for Mario, Ocarina of Time did it for Zelda, and Symphony of the Night did it for Castlevania. Simon's Quest may have introduced the idea of an explorative Castlevania, but Symphony is the one that made it work. Bringing back Alucard is a genius stroke, as it not only connected to the past, but paved a way to the future. No longer were players mainly limited to a whip, but tons of different weapons and abilities could be used, changing just how each person played the game. The 2D sprites are still gorgeous to this day, and the game is stuffed with Easter eggs and small touches that make it pop. Every moment has been ingrained in the memories of not only Castlevania fans, but anybody who played games at this moment in time. There's a reason much of the dialogue still pops up as memes to this day. I could easily replay the game again and again, and have over the years. This was the game that introduced me to Castlevania after all my friends were gushing about it. I don't even mind the reverse castle, as it just gives me an excuse to keep playing. But why only number 4? Well, although I think Symphony of the Night is potentially the most important Castlevania game, I don't think it's the most fun to play. It's amazing to be sure. In fact, if you haven't played it, I can't recommend enough that you fix that immediately. But my top 3 offer things a little bit different. This is a game that sets the standard, a baseline that's hopefully met and expanded upon in later entries, and 2 of them did just that. For the third, we have to look at what came directly before. I did not expect to adore Rondo of Blood as much as I do. For me, it is classic Castlevania perfection. Every level is memorable and fun. There are multiple routes to take, but it's not necessary to replay the entire game to see them. The bosses are fun across the board, and the game even does something new with sub-weapons thanks to the item crash ability. It's an absolute shame that it took so long to come to the West, but I can't recommend it enough. There's a sense of fun here that never left me, no matter how tricky it might get. And that's just in regard to Richter. Add in Maria, and you have one of the best, most overpowered characters in gaming. She can run, slide, double jump, and send out deadly birds as she moves. Yeah, she has less health than Richter, but that's assuming everything doesn't just die from being in her presence. Even the fight with Dracula is a cinch, with one of the silliest and most endearing endings in this series. The music is also a treat, and I struggle to think of anything negative to say about the game. For me, this is the true successor of the original Castlevania, capturing the simplicity and replayability of that game while making it better. It's not a very hard game either, making it a great entry point for newcomers who still want some challenge. I love it, and the only reason it's not in the top spot is because I simply enjoy explorative Castlevanias more. As the end of the Castlevania chronology, discounting Dawn of Sorrow, Aria of Sorrow is a great capstone to its story. The very idea of sealing Dracula's castle within an eclipse is just so out there that it works. And Soma as a protagonist makes for a great successor to Alucard, as he can also wield weapons of every size and shape. But what makes it all come together is the soul system, where every enemy can give Soma its soul, allowing him to use their abilities and change up not only combat, but how you explored the castle. It was addictive wanting to see them all, but that also led to one of its bigger issues. Aria of Sorrow can feel really stingy. The rate of soul drops, especially for the truly powerful ones, feels like an absolute grind. And there is a reason for that, as players could trade souls with their friends. That's not something I've ever done though, so instead it makes collecting every soul a hassle. But that really is my only complaint with the game. It takes what worked about Symphony of the Night and expanded upon it in a smart way. It's not an especially long game either, which helps its replayability. The story's great, the combat is fun, the castle design is the best on the Game Boy Advance, and it introduced a character so beloved in Julius Belmont that fans are still wishing for a 1999 game that shows how Julius finally defeated Dracula. It's a true favorite that I could come back to anytime. Order of Ecclesia is the culmination of the Castlevania series for me, which feels appropriate considering it was the last traditional game released that took place in the original timeline. It takes bits of every element and every idea, blending them together to create a game that just does everything right. It's an explorative Castlevania, but it's not limited to a castle. You go around the countryside, which changes up the geography and what needs to be explored. There's a central village where side quests can be taken on that adds more of a reason to explore or do certain things. The graphics and art style return to a more gothic edge that exemplifies Castlevania's look. Plus, the game is by far the most challenging of the explorative games. And to top it all off, it even uses a variation of collecting souls thanks to the glyph system. It essentially works the same, except glyphs also act as main character Shanoa's weapons as well. Every action with a glyph consumes MP, meaning that players have to use a bit more thought in combat than just whacking away with their best weapon. But glyphs can even be combined to perform more devastating attacks. It's so good how it all comes together. And Shanoa herself is endearing as she seeks to regain her lost memories while dealing with the tragedies that keep happening around her. The bosses are great with some brutal finishers, and the music is as good as it's ever been. Even the drop rate of new glyphs is better balanced than the souls in either Sorrow game. Order of Ecclesia has been perfected to a razor-sharp edge that cuts through anything that didn't work or hones it into something better. Hopefully it's re-released someday, or you can track down a copy for yourself, because I believe it's something any fan of the Metroidvania genre needs to play. Order of Ecclesia is simply that good. And there you have it. 32 games in total that took the simple idea of a man with a whip tearing his way through monsters of all shapes and sizes to create one of the best long-running series in gaming. I had an incredible time playing through every game, seeing its ups and downs, and I can't thank everyone who joined me for the live streams enough for supporting me through this journey. That I got to introduce people to the series is an honor, and hopefully this ranking inspires a few more people to check out games they missed. But how would you rank the games? What's your least and most loved game? Let us know in the comments, and be sure to subscribe to Game Explained for any future Castlevania news and other things gaming.